So yeah, Lorji, I would love to hear what actually is an eclipse in your view, and that can be,
Good question.
yeah, you can mention astronomically. You can also mention Vedically, energetically. We'll go into specific aspects of it, but in general, like what's happening in the sky in this universe at this time?
I feel like we have to really honor these luminaries of ours. It's think to ask what is an eclipse is like first let's ask what is not the eclipse. What is normal? What is this world we're living in? Mostly we're used to light, right? We're used to the light coming up every morning. And we're used to it, right? I mean, let's even stop. My husband and I, he's had such a beautiful practice of every evening, ever since I met him, he had this practice of going to the beach at night and watching the sunset. And every single time we would watch the sunset over the ocean, it was, thank you, sun, for coming back today. Like where it's normal that the sun comes back, but stop and think about it for a minute. Wow, isn't it great that it comes back? And how beautiful that we have this opportunity each day to start afresh, that we have an opportunity each day to have one more day to hopefully evolve our consciousness and hopefully evolve our soul on its journey. So, we as yogis, we honor the light and we're reminded that that light of the sun that is that central force around which we are all spinning, the earth and all the planets, that is also the light within us, right? And everything sort of spins around that light, that central force within us.
Mm.
The sun reminds us of our own essential nature. And then we say, and make me more like that, please. Let me be more enlightened. Let me be more life-giving. How beautiful is that? And you can just imagine what must have been like for people not even very long ago, 100, maybe 200 years ago. Maybe we have to go back 200, 300 years. But people who were mostly either farmers or nomadic or really living in nature. And imagine they're out at midday and all of a sudden it goes dark. How frightening that must have been, right? And so there's all kinds of stories from all kinds of different cultures. And one of the stories that we know of from the Himalayan culture or the Vedic culture is this idea that there was some dragon who is an asura. Like he doesn't know about his own inner light, right? And so he has to go outside of himself. He sees people praying to the sun. He sees the Brahmins every morning getting up and doing their rituals to the sun. And he says, "Oh, the sun must have something great about it. What happens if I go and eat it? Then I'll become like that, and all the world will pray to me. All the world will honor me." And so he jumps in the sky, according to this story, and he goes and eats the sun. And it's interesting because you almost can see if you ever do look at a solar or a lunar eclipse, it's almost sometimes, not always, it can almost look like a bite was taken out of it, like there's this partial
Yeah,
bit.
for sure.
So then they have the story, of course, of the churning of the ocean, and the gods are seeking the nectar of immortality. And when these asuras, these unenlightened ones, come see what the gods are doing, they say, "Oh, we'd like that nectar of immortality too." So they come along and they make a deal, which I love because it's such a reminder that as we do our own spiritual churning, we don't want to spiritually bypass. We have to include our darkness. We have to include our illusions. We have to include the part of ourselves that feels unenlightened, that feels not whole and complete. So beautiful. So they have to come together to churn the ocean because they're seeking to churn that nectar. So, of course, as they churn the ocean, up comes all the, you know, bicycle wheels and rusty cans and right gym shoes and all the things that are there, like all the junk, right? The junk in our own selves as well. But anyway, so eventually the nectar of immortality comes up. It comes way up like a source. And this nectar, this drop of nectar, is about to fall on the tongue of this very same dragon. So just as the nectar falls on his tongue, Vishnu's throwing his chakra across the ocean. It beheads this dragon, and the head flies in one direction, the body and tail in another direction. But he got the nectar of immortality. So now there's this beheaded dragon living forever in the sky. And that represents duality, right? It represents not the light and the dark, the night and the day. In Jyotish, we can look at that. We call this head of the dragon Rahu, and the body and tail of the dragon is called Ketu. Rahu is also the north lunar node. and Ketu is the south lunar node. So just back to your question, what is an eclipse? Well, some people would tell you it's the day when either the head of the dragon eats either the sun or the moon, depending on if it's a solar or lunar eclipse, or the body of the dragon blocks so we can't see it. I mean, now with science, of course, we know through astronomy that it's really quite beautiful that the solar eclipse is when solar eclipse comes at Amavasya. So when the moon wanes and wanes and wanes, get darker and darker and darker, and then it finds itself, and it's rare that it happens, but it happens once every 6 months. The Earth and the moon and the sun are so perfectly lined up that the moon blocks the sun. And isn't that beautiful too? Because the moon's so much smaller than the sun. How does it completely block it? That's the interesting thing about the ratios. Like you could almost call that a golden ratio of the distance from Earth to moon is 108 times roughly the diameter of the moon. And the same goes for the sun, 108 times the diameter of the sun. And the sun is, of course, so much bigger and it's so much farther that when they line up, the moon can fully block the sun. So it wasn't a dragon that went and ate it, but it is a kind of a darkness, right? It's a darkness in the middle of the day. And that blocking of the light, if especially, if it's daytime, is abnormal to our regulations. And you know, as an Ayurveda, how important regulation is, how important it is to regulate ourselves. So that's the solar eclipse. The lunar eclipse is at the full moon. And that's the other thing I find so interesting is that it's always a dark moon, what they in the West call new moon, but it's basically the dark moon. The new moon is when the moon starts to wax, then it becomes new. But when the moon is right there and it's blocking the sun, and then the full moon is when the earth, right, is blocking the light of the sun, so we don't see the moon. So it's not that the sun ever goes away, it's not that the light ever goes away. And that's such a beautiful reminder that the light is always within. The light is always there. And that's what the ancient yogis were teaching us, the ancient Vedic astrologers, the ancient rishis were telling us there is a light that never goes out, right? There is an individual, uneclipsable, immortal light within you. So instead of looking outward, where there is that duality, where there is sometimes, very occasionally, that abnormal blocking of the light, look within to the light that never goes out and cultivate that light. That's the true light, right? So it's quite beautiful, I think. It's beautiful how the ancients saw it, even though scientifically we know it to be different. It's not a dragon, yet it is an alteration of that which is normal. It's a disruption, and it does disrupt. It disrupts the eyes. We know it's dangerous to the eyes. It disrupts the optic nerve. How do we read the sun? We read it through the eyes and through our skin. And through the skin, it can disrupt. It can be a hormonal disruptor. And many people complain of sleep issues, anxiety, flu-like symptoms, balance issues, dizziness during times of eclipses. So that's not to say that that's scientific or that's scientifically studied, but I hope one day there will be more science to study the effect of the eclipse. The ancient ones always said, don't go out and look at it, go inward. Also, because at a time of an eclipse, supposedly your meditation practice is amplified by up to 1,000 times.
And
Another
that
good
is,
reason. But
yeah. And I love what you said about the disruption in the circadian rhythm. We know how much that affects. So this distortion or this abnormal uh, event creates this disruptions, and people might think it's quite an insignificant disruption or it just happens for an hour. It's just a bit of light changing. But I don't know, the planets are pretty powerful, and to have this event that kind of flows in like a gush of like a wave into our to our weather, to our seasons, to our circadian rhythm, it's quite
mhm,
powerful. And I think
mhm,
particularly if you are sensitive to the
mhm,
environment and to the planets and to the cosmic weather, you
mhm.
can feel these effects
You can feel it.
and utilize
Yeah,
them, as you said. It's a very, very cherished time to perform spiritual practice or sadhana. And a
right.
lot of people look forward to eclipses for this reason because they're hitchhiking on
Yeah,
this energy. In India once I was
right.
there, and there was an eclipse happening, but it wasn't visible from where we were in the South India. And what some people were actually doing were they would travel interstate to the North India to be where the eclipse was. Because we may think, but eclipse, we need to stay inside. But they would actually travel to be in that environment, still be protected and do all their practice, but to have the more potent sadhana. So,
I could see the Agoris doing something like that too. It's
right.
very, yeah, yeah, very, very sort of tantric practice. That sounds like,
Mm.
yeah, really. I
So
love what you said earlier.
why? No, go on.
No, I was just gonna say, so I love what you said earlier about some people might think, well, it's just an hour, no big deal. And I think there's two things about that. One is that, yes, the body, if the body is sattvic, right, in a state of balance, then sure, the body can heal itself, the body can repair itself. Afterwards, you can get your feet in the grass, walk through a forest, right, do your deep breathing, your meditations. And yes, your body will restore itself. Sure, that's the beauty. That's what, again, what I love about Ayurveda is it points to the resiliency of our biology. But the other thing is that, people that I've worked with in Ayurveda who have moved from India, so they're families from India for many generations, but they moved to somewhere like California, where I am now. Their doctors often put them on vitamin D. Now, where we are in California, we get a lot of sunlight. So, of course, we know that India can be full of sun, it can be warm, but we get a lot of sunlight too. And we're about, at least where I am in Southern California, we're about even with Rishikesh. And so, I remember asking this question like, why are we having to take vitamin D when one is exposed to so much
Mm.
sunlight? And it turns out that the angle of the light is different. The angle of the sunlight, sun to California versus sun to India, the angle is different. And so the human body, having been born and raised in one country, living on the other side of the world, is now not able to properly metabolize through its skin the same sunlight to get the same kind of vitamin D. And so they need supplementation. To me, that shows how really refined the human body is, how truly sensitive our biology actually is, right? And so if the angle of the sunlight, which just seems so subtle, can throw off a person's capacity to metabolize vitamin D so extensively, then who knows what a solar eclipse can actually do to us, right? That's something that really hasn't been studied fully yet.
That's very interesting, and so that's because I assume their biology has become accustomed to a certain angle, and then that's what it's used to, and then when it changes, it kind of metabolizes it, which is like
It's
okasatmya.
okasatmia, so much like that. In fact, I was just going to say it's a lot like food, right?
Right.
You see that people who move to a different country often develop metabolic disorders
Mm.
because they're eating a food that could be healthy, considered healthy, but it's not their food of their people. And so when we talk about the importance of region, the importance of local, right, we're also talking about the importance of, in a way, your genetics, your DNA, what you've inherited, and rooting into that, rooting into the ancestral wisdom, foods, and even sunlight. It's all part of
Yeah.
the aharas in a way.
Very fascinating. Yeah, and also the fact that Indians or dark skinned people have more melanin, they can't absorb as much vitamin D. But yeah, I definitely see the same thing here of over supplementation of vitamin D when it is available. And I think there's still ways to, like with food, you still have to adapt to where you're living and to your local habitat and redesign your life, your diet, and your lifestyle to be able to absorb the nutrients such as sunlight in your new place. But that's another conversation of okasatmya, of customization. So you mentioned with the disruption of the circadian. We asked our audience what questions they had on eclipses, and basically by far the most common question was, why do we stay inside? So I think before that we have to elaborate. I would like to elaborate more if you have anything more to say on why eclipses are generally considered quote unquote inauspicious. I mean, you said they disrupt the circadian rhythm. um, I kind of see it as this powerful, very powerful um, energies that are interchanging in the environment, and thus it's considered for us to be inward and not interfere with them because they're too powerful for us. It's kind of like
Mhm.
menstruation. You know,
Mhm.
one might say it's inauspicious to go to the temple while menstruating, and not that it's bad, but it's like I see the menstrual cycle similar to a lunar. You know, we're talking about the moon. A lunar cycle is that the
Mhm.
flow of fluids and the flow of shakti, of creative energy that's happening at the shedding of the lining, is just powerful beyond human comprehension. Therefore, better just, don't be intimate with the menstruating woman. Don't even, ideally, let them be fully within themselves rather than with other people to that will kind of take away from that powerful energy. So that's kind of how I see eclipses, and I've felt on multiple occasions personally. Um, but yeah, I would love you to also add whatever else you think in regards to
Well, I think what you said
inauspiciousness.
is so beautiful. Yeah, and so brilliant and so perfect. You've said it so beautifully. And I like the comparison to the lunar cycle in women. Um, that reminds me of the red tent, and I think a lot of women that I know have been very intrigued by that idea that women generally tend to, if they're living again in rhythm and close to one another, their cycles will entrain with the cycle of the moon and with one another. And then that idea of going to the red tent and all being together, where you can journal and sing and sew and do all the things that are just relaxing and restorative, so healthy and so healing. And maybe if we thought of it that way, that this is a time when the forces are quite strong, and rather than thinking, because I think nowadays we're so used to us humans thinking that we've overcome nature, so to speak, and we control it now. And so I think it's beautiful to take a time like an eclipse and say, wow, nature is really powerful. And it is still more powerful than we are. And that there are certain times, huge monsoons, huge snowstorms, huge landslides. I mean, there's still times when nature roars, and she's a mother, right? She's our mother nature. And there are times where she's like Kali and she's slaying. And what do you do in those times? You get on your knees and you bow and you say, thank you, I love you, thank you, I love you, thank you. I just want to work with you. I just want to be one with you. I just want to be part of you. And so I think if we think of it again, like in a little bit like the red tent idea, that these are beautiful times for ritual, beautiful times for being devotional, beautiful times for being more humble, right? And like you
Hmm.
said, it's like, and the awe that it can also bring, like, wow, nature is ferocious, powerful. Aren't
Hmm.
I lucky to be here, to be on this planet Earth, and to even to be able to witness this? So it's not to hide from it. It's not to miss the awe of it, because it is an awesome event, but it's actually to be humble, right? And really to do what the yogis invited us to do, to turn
Hmm.
to the uneclipsable light, where your meditation is amplified by about 1,000 times. If that isn't an invitation, I don't know what is.
Yeah. Something about looking, like, let's get, I guess, be very relative now and looking at the eclipse. Of course, there's an invitation to go inward, definitely, but it's considered don't look at it. And some people will say, yeah, that just is a metaphor for, go inward, close your senses. But there are, and I personally felt the
Mhm.
intensity of looking. For example, the not long ago, this was, I think, a month or two ago, recent eclipse in early 2025. And I
Mhm.
forgot it was eclipse because I had a family gathering that I couldn't miss. Usually I wouldn't go out on such a night, but I went there and I just got forgot about the eclipse. And they said, "Oh, let's go for a walk to the beach." And we walked to the beach, and
Oh.
I saw literally the chunk, the drag and bite out of the eclipse. So I'm not sure, Laura, whether this was a solar or a lunar. I guess it was a solar eclipse because this was about 1 hour before sunset. The
Mm.
sun. Sorry, it was a lunar eclipse. It was about 1 hour around sunset time. The moon was just rising above the east coast, which we are on.
Mhm.
We were at the beach, and I saw this chunk out the moon, and kind of even my father, who I was with, was like, thought it was a cloud, and I think most people thought it was a cloud blocking, but straight away remembered, and I had my son in my hand, and I just turned around
Oh.
and I went home, and like I was like, wow, like I can feel why, and it's not to say that I'm weak or that any of that, and to be honest, I went back upstairs with the family, and I just all I wanted to do was just go into a room and meditate. And that's what I did eventually. Not long after, I just went there and I saw it was a very short eclipse. It was like a 45-minute partial lunar eclipse. And
Mhm.
it was apparently meant to sometimes be visible in Australia, but it was clearly visible partially. And it felt so much better to be doing my sadhana. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, I just
Mhm.
want to explore this notion of being damaging to look at or being harmful.
Mhm.
And I think even my personal experience in that case, it definitely was not the most evolutionary thing for me to be looking at an eclipse, and I could feel the
Mhm.
disturbance and how beneficial it was to go into downstairs in silence and meditate and do chanting, and then followed by a shower. Okay, now I'm ready to. It's finished. It's over. I kept checking the calendar, and all right. It just felt more in tune with nature. But I do want
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
explore this notion of avoiding, because of course in the West a lot of people like to view eclipses. It's a wonderful astronomically thing to do
Mhm.
for
Right.
very many
Mhm.
people. But that drishti, that vision aspect of it.
Right. Which I love. I love that your understanding of the integration of the Vedic sciences is so brilliant, and whenever you come up with that Sanskrit word, it's always like I can see light, right? It's just because the Sanskrit is so full of light itself. And what I love about what you just said, I've also done that. I did that once where I was like sort of snuck a peek, and it was just an interesting time in my life where I was just feeling a little rebellious. It was a long time ago, but I thought I'm gonna look, and again, I saw this like bite. It was like the Cookie Monster just took a
Mm,
big bite out of the sun, and the sun was very blood moon. I mean, sorry, it was the moon. It was a lunar eclipse that took a big bite out of the moon. It was probably around 10 at night, and the moon was beautiful and orangey, and it was incredible. And it was a really beautiful thing, but I immediately felt my eyes crossing. I could just feel like, ooh, and I could feel a zap kind of feeling, nervous system zap of electrical energy in my body. And I went to bed, not much later, and I couldn't fall asleep. And I was chanting and doing my mantras, and I had to get up and do some meditation. I was probably up till 2 in the morning. So energizing, but not in a good way. It was
mm,
so electrifying, but not in a good way. And what I've thought about a lot since is when you think about how we see. So, some people have drawn these pictures where you'll see like a circle and then a cone and then the cone and then the circle into the brain. I mean, what we see is reorganized by the brain, right? The brain has this incredible way of taking what we see and reorganizing it, and actually reorganizing it to match with what it already knows. So if I look outside and I see a dove, I've already seen a dove, I already know what it sounds like, I know what it looks like. Brain sees it, oh, recognizes dove. And so I love to remember that we are what we eat. We are what we eat and we are what we think, but we also are what we see. And I think those relate to the different bodies. What we eat, right, relates to the physical body and somewhat to the mental. What we think relates very much to the mental and the emotional body, and what we see relates to our spiritual body. And if what we see, the drishti, I mean, how does drishti even work? If you are with somebody whose nervous system is utterly relaxed, like in such a deep state of relaxation, you probably never even experienced it. It's so deeply relaxed, right? In such pure presence, you are overcome with feelings of safety. You are overcome with feelings of belonging, of wholeness. And that's because you're looking at someone looking back at you, and it's doing something to your brain, that's doing something to your nervous system. If that works, that's the positive expression. Then seeing something dark is going to have the same effect, but in reverse. So if you think, I mean, there's this idea monkey, right? You go into Haridwar, and they've got three giant monkey statues, and one's covering its eyes, one's covering its ears, one's covering its mouth. It's like, and the idea is don't allow in through your five senses darkness or negativity. You get to choose. Choose light, choose beauty. Once you actually did a beautiful post, I think, about like, we talk about how we don't want violence in our life. We only want peace. But then why are we watching shows that have
Mm,
violence in them and use violent language, right? I mean, we need to be thoughtful and mindful about what we allow in. And so in ancient times, they didn't have shows that were violent. All they had was the eclipses for the most part. But they're basically just saying, don't turn towards darkness. Don't let darkness, your brain doesn't know what to do with it. It gets confused. It's it's disrupting the neurological system. Instead, look at the light, whether it's a light being, a sage, right? Or the light itself, or a flower which is eats the light, reflects the light, right? Stay focused on the light. And when outside is dark, turn inward. Right now in America, we are governed by Rahu. Rahu is so active right now, so awake, so alive, so ravenous. But we're ready for it because we've been practicing our whole life. Where's the true light? And
mm,
nobody is going to eat that light within me. That's kind of what it's like. No, I will not let any Rahu anywhere eat that light within, right? So I think it's very powerful because it's also a way of, it's kind of like setting a spiritual boundary. I
mm,
hew to the light, and it's
mm,
only light. And some people who are, like you said, it's not that one's sensitive, it's that one's awake and one's
mm.
aware and one's making wise choices. That's what we're asking people to do in Ayurveda, right? Make wise choices.
Absolutely. And this is what I love about Jyotish is Vedic astrology. It expands your sophistication of your circadian rhythms. As you said, like we create boundaries. Like in Ayurveda, we have, okay, go to bed before 10 o'clock because that's when the crucial sleep happens. Wake up with the sun. Those are kind of boundaries. But the more one learns about Jyotish, and I'm now like emphasizing this as an invitation, and I'm sure that people already listening are on that journey of expanding their rhythms beyond the day and night rhythm. But maybe you're going seasonal, but then with astrology, it's like, oh, what's the new moon going to do? What's a new full moon? What's an eclipse? What's an equinox? What's a solstice?
Mhm,
And when the
mhm.
sun moves to this zodiac, and which Laura is all about. So just I love expanding the
And
sophistication
nakshatras.
of the rhythms.
Right.
Sorry.
And if you even think about how the moon passing in front of the nakshatras, which are the stars within the signs, and how distinct and unique each nakshatra is, and there's that moon bouncing the light of those stars in such a way that you're making a completely different personality. Like that's how impactful they are and how powerful they are. And also for people listening, just think about the time, if ever in your life, where it was a full moon and you had trouble falling asleep, speaking of circadian rhythms. And there are a lot of studies that show that there's higher crime rates when the moon is full, there's higher accidents when the moon is full. And they think it's because there's actually more light, because the full moon is reflecting the light of the sun. And with that more light, we have a harder time falling asleep. We have a harder time calming down. So now it's nighttime, but we're ready to roar. We're ready to rock. We're ready to roll, right? We're ready to. And so people are staying up later. Maybe they're drinking more. Then they're getting into accidents and fights, and there's more crime. And if that's true, and you're talking about just a simple full moon that happens every month, and we should be used to it by now, imagine what eclipses do. So they just really haven't studied it enough yet. As much as, this is what's so beautiful about being alive now is that scientists are now studying Ayurveda. They're now studying and they're showing that daily abhyanga with sesame oil can halt the progression of cognitive disorders. Well, who would have thought to study daily abhyanga with sesame oil 25 years ago? But we're seeing so much of this kind of research into yoga, Ayurveda, and Jyotish. And so I bet 5 years from now, we're going to be able to get back together and we're going to say, you know what, there's a new scientific study, and they've shown that this happens when you go and look at an eclipse. Now, again, solar eclipses you can't look at anywhere, you have to wear those glasses. So, of course, the sages were talking about that. They were talking about people were probably getting, and the thing about your eyes burning out is that you don't feel it. It's painless. And it can even take a few days before you're starting to notice that there's maybe not a full blinding, but there's a partial kind of blinding that can come from that. So, yeah.
I love how you mentioned the nakshatras giving a flavor to each moon, like because there's 27 constellations, so it can have its own flavor. And that brings me to a question about which I'm sure is on a lot of people's mind, is like, well, some people are more sensitive to others. Like, oh, okay, Dylan, because you thought you knew it was the eclipse, that's why you felt that. And if someone didn't know, which to extent is true to extent, but I also would like to speak about some people are more sensitive to the moon, for example, the moon or eclipses, and some people aren't. So I'd love to hear. I'm sure that's based on different people's charts. So I'd love to hear a bit of an overview of that. And also, uh, if you have any examples or stories or clients or case studies that you can think of how someone is so sensitive to either all eclipses or all full moons, or maybe some of them because it was in their nakshatra or like that.
Yeah, a great
Sensitivity.
question. It's a great question. So there are certain sensitivity markers in the chart, and anybody whose moon is in a water sign, right? Because the moon relates to the water element in the body. And water relates to many things. Actually, water in Jyotish relates to moksha, relates to spiritual evolution. And so that's an interesting piece of that. But
What are the
Cancer,
water signs?
Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So if you have moon in Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces, you have a water sign moon. And water sign moon people are generally sensitive, not in a bad way. They can be sensitive, they can pick up on other people's feelings, they can have a great deal of empathy, they can be intuitive, they can even have sort of ESP, right? There's they're just tuned in. And again, that water element is sort of feeling the tides, right? So the moon governs the tides and they're almost feeling the tides as they're moving. And that it's interesting what you say. Like somebody said to you, well, Dylan, you knew it was going to happen, so therefore maybe that's why. But I think, in the best sense, knowing something can happen is going to happen, or knowing about a thing can help us be more aware, and then we pay attention, and then we notice. It doesn't, I mean, sure,
Right.
the placebo effect, it can make us just say something. But I think the more aware and awake we are, the more we're just saying, well, let me see what that feels like. Let me be an observer of that. Now that I know this might happen, let me experience it for my own self.
That was
So, anyway,
certainly my experience, just to add.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Sensitivity markers, we often say that people with a Leo, sun in Leo, or moon in Leo, might really feel the solar eclipse because the planet that rules their sun or their moon is now being eclipsed. And so that's another one. So now we've got 4 out of the 12 signs. The other people who might really feel it are people who have strong moons, like if the moon is in the rising sign, or if the moon is maybe even in the 10th house, then they could really feel it. Um, could be if somebody's moon or even sun is, yeah, I mean, even somebody who has sun or moon in the rising sign. So I should say that for the sun too. And then if somebody has an afflicted moon, that or sun, that could give a sensitivity where it's important for them anyways to do practices that help cultivate the sun or cultivate the moon within, and that those would be meditation practices, mantra practices, various rituals. And so when the sun or moon is eclipsed, all the more they want to do those sorts of practices. So those kinds of afflictions would be if Saturn is conjunct or aspecting the sun or moon, if Rahu especially is conjunct the moon, but also the sun. Same with Ketu, conjunct or aspecting moon or sun. And then Mars. Mars can be, especially with the moon, Mars can be a fire that can burn up the moon, sort of thing. And so, well, that's a lot of people by the end of it, by the time you count all that up. But I would say the people who are most powerfully moved by the new and full moon, I would say mainly by the full moon, would be the water sign moon people, right?
I
Especially.
I once experienced a very powerful eclipse, and I believe we recorded a podcast. Well, we did record a podcast on it. We talked about eclipses, and that was after an eclipse that I had an exceptionally powerful experience. And you looked at my chart and you saw, I think it was the eclipse was in the same nakshatra as my moon. So would that also be something? Is when, depending on the nakshatra that eclipse is in. Um,
Ah, great question. So if the Well, I think people who are starting to pay attention will feel, for instance, when the moon is full in their sign or their nakshatra.
Right.
I've really noticed that with people, but you have to have an awareness of it, right? But then you start paying attention. It's really beautiful to follow the moon and its nakshatras, because when the moon, for instance, is in Taurus, I've really noticed everything feels calm, right? When the moon is
Mm.
in Scorpio, I notice people feel a little bit more wobbly, a little bit more fragile. So it's interesting to see that. And yes, if the moon were either full or eclipsed, and it's in the nakshatra where the moon was when you were born, you're probably going to feel it. But again, a lot of people, Dylan, it depends who the person is. I mean, a lot of people will work through it, right? Or they'll sleep through it, or they'll keep busy and they won't really be paying attention. But somebody who just stops, pauses, pays attention to what they're feeling, yeah, it's definitely something that you can notice. Hmm.
I noticed that, by the way, after like I just was saying how powerful it was, and you're like, actually, your nakshatra. It was your nakshatra. Have you got
Hmm.
any stories or anything in mind when you think of a client or think of someone who's had exceptionally specific eclipse impact on them, or a moon impact, or does anything come to mind? Does anyone come to mind that has really been hypersensitive to it, or hyper just in any way relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of examples. I think we could look at the world right now and March 14th, just looking back a little bit, March 14th, we had that lunar eclipse, and then March 29th, we had a solar eclipse. And with both of those eclipses, global markets went wobbly, and the at least the US stock market went kind of belly up. And we could see that those eclipses were probably going to deliver something like that. They were happening in or involving Leo, in or involving Pisces. Um, Leo is the rising sign of our president, and Leo can have to do with rulership. And then, and particularly, I think that one was in Uttara Falguni, if I remember properly, ruled by Venus, has to do with trade and materialism in a way, and luxury and things like that. So you can actually see, just looking back recently, something that's really impacted us quite strongly. The solar eclipse that came at the end of the month came with Venus, Mercury, and Saturn all in that, and the sun, and in that pileup. So you had Sun, Moon, Rahu, Venus, Mercury, and Saturn all together in the same sign. And Pisces is sort of interesting, but it is the last of the signs. So you do ask yourself, if there's an eclipse happening, all these planets are here, in the last of the signs, is something coming to an end? Is something breaking? Is there some reason for this darkness, and what would come on the other side of it? So that's the other thing that I like to really invite people to do during an eclipse, is to really think about, because again, especially if it's a solar eclipse, that moon is about to be new. So also, if we can go in, we're invited to do that at Amavasya time anyway. As the moon reaches its darkest point, we're invited to go inward anyway. The moon is our mind, right? The moon reflects our mind, and the sun reflects the light of consciousness, the indwelling spirit, that truth, that Atma at the heart. And so bringing the mind to the heart is what's happened with our solar system, our world, our neighbors. The moon, the queen, has returned to the king. She's returned to the sun. She's almost returned, she has returned to that which lights her up. The moon is entirely lit by the sun. The moon doesn't have any light of its own. So at this moment, she's come back to the sun. It's like her period of rest.
Hmm.
And so she represents the humans. We want to go back to our rest, resting in our true nature. That's true
Hmm.
at Amavasya anyway. And then when you get a solar eclipse on top of it, all the more. And then create intentions, because the moon will be new in just 12 hours, and she'll be free of the eclipse will be over. And then she's going to start to grow. So what do we want to see on the other side of that?
Hmm.
And with what just happened then, it was in Pisces, and Pisces is all about hope and faith and unity consciousness, even. So if the world's going to break apart, what's our vision for what comes next? Right?
Hmm.
So they can be very powerful times that way as well. And I'm just trying to think if what an example is. I know I've had clients who they have felt really shaken, Oftentimes you'll feel it before it comes. I often feel that with transits and things before it's coming. You're just feeling
Mm.
like the earth's shaking almost. Something in you is just reverberating. And you don't know what it is. You don't know what it is because the nodes will not tell you, right? Rahu and Ketu, the north and south lunar nodes, which are that which create the eclipses, they're all about unpredictability, uncertainty, that which is hidden, that which cannot be seen. So you're feeling a trembling. You know something's coming. You can feel almost a gravitational pull, but you don't know what it is. And the best thing is to not need to know, right? Release yourself from the need to know. Go into your meditative state. And then, but go into that state again in the light with clear intention. And then you sort of give that to it. And then all of a sudden, I've had people, it will set you free, but it's like truth will set you free. I can think of an example. A woman did a process where they were doing some shamanic exercises, right? They were doing, I forget what they were doing exactly, but some kind of psychotropic. And it was in eclipse time. And they knew, like, okay, we're going to go inward, we're going to do this. And well, in that process, her husband told her that he had not been faithful. And on the other side of this, they ended up with a divorce and her whole life changed. I don't love telling people that because I don't want people to be that, afraid that that could happen. But I have to say, this person is literally a changed person. She's so free now. And
Mm.
she's a yogi enough that even as she was going through the dissolution of her marriage, she understood that, oh, now that I realize this, I realize there was something that wasn't really right here. But I wanted
Mm.
it to be right. So I was trying to make it right. But now, what a lot of energy that's liberated for her, that she doesn't have to pretend this is working. And she didn't know what was not working about the marriage, right? It's so confusing when that happens. But suddenly it just literally like that, the marriage breaks and she's off and she traveled and she went to Bali and she went to India and she did the things. And she's really, really a changed person in a beautiful
Mm.
and important way. So, yeah, they're powerful forces.
It's great when you can
Respect.
have that. Great when you can have that cosmic event to kind of give that push and allow for that transition to happen, which has been waiting to. So, in
Right.
regards to like what to do and rituals or what to eat or what not to eat, can you just give us like an overview of kind of what you do or you'd recommend others to do. Uh,
If I could just say, to be really clear, lunar eclipses, because it's the moon and that's the mind and humans and Sita, right? And the sun is Ram and the creator, right? And so the mind reflecting the light of the sun, that's what we're always focused on. Let's have a full moon. Let's fully reflect as humans the light of the sun. Ram and Sita, right? Entwined and living together and working together. So lunar eclipses generally affect the humans, the everyday people, the mind, the emotions, whereas a solar eclipse will more likely affect the leaders, the government, the heads of government. And so something will happen there. It could happen to a particular leader, or it could happen that the leader itself will do something that seems a bit, you know, disrupting.
mm,
So that's one
right.
thing to remember. And which one comes first, right? So this recently we had the lunar eclipse. So it was more the mental, emotional level and the human level. Humans getting stressed and having problems. Next, we're going to have in September, October, we're going to have the solar eclipse first and then the lunar eclipse. So it'll be led by the solar eclipse. We'll look for heads of government or government rulings kind of doing something very
Mhm.
eclipsing light. That's one thing to remember. Another thing is that this kind of intensity, this kind of, as you said, cosmic event, isn't going to happen to everyone every time there's an eclipse. It's like you said earlier. If it's happening across the nakshatra of your moon, then it's likely to have a powerful effect. It could also happen across your rising sign. It could also happen across your sun sign. So it depends really, your chart is really going to matter. For instance, at an individual level, we just had this lunar and solar eclipse. I didn't feel anything, but I noticed a lot of other people around me were really feeling it. And that's
Mm.
because of the impact it's going to have on your individual chart. So just so people know, you don't have to look for a cosmic event every 6 months when we have eclipses. It's good to know your chart and to see how it will impact you based on your chart, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay.
And and then you ask this question of what to do.
Yeah. So in general, like what would you say in terms of rituals, practices, food?
Well, so generally we're invited to fast. And as you know, fasting can be so individual. I mean, I know, of course, in India there's ceremonial fasting and there's certain rules and protocols for that. But Ayurvedically speaking, I do like to remember that too much fasting and strenuous fasting is not ideal for vata. And when there's less sun, less light, right? It's a little bit like vata season. So we don't want to stress the vata. So it could be, that you're basically, I think the idea that you want to keep in mind is eating a little bit less, having some discipline around it so that you're careful about maybe being very regular about eating, not eating foods that are tamasic or rajasic, and even making some sort of a sacrifice. So, if every single day you like to have uh, coconut milk with your food, maybe this day you don't. You have simple broth, simple dal, simple, keep it very, very simple. And then before you eat, you make offerings, right? So always making offerings, and offerings definitely to our elders, our ancestors, our teachers. Because really the idea here is that humility, that remembering that we are alive in a world that is powerful. And we are alive because of those who have gone before us, right? And because of those who are still here with us, helping and supporting us along the way. So it's like remembering that light within you, but also the light. And how do we get light from others? And how do we get light from nature?
Mm.
And, how does the moon within us reflect that light? And how do others reflect? Who are our friends who reflect that for us? So, for some people, that might be gratitude prayers or it might be journaling, but always light a candle. I love Tratak at this time. Light a candle, look at the candle. When you're done looking at the candle, close your eyes and look at the light that is echoed there at the back of your
Mm.
closed eyes until it dissolves away. And
Beautiful.
remember the light within. Mantra, you could do the Gayatri mantra for solar eclipse. You can do, I love a simple Om Som Somaya Namaha for the moon at a lunar eclipse. So moon mantras. Um,
Mm.
yeah,
That's great. That's wonderful.
yeah.
Thanks for sharing those mantras and those
Oh, and
aspects.
bath. Oh, the other thing, just sorry, if I could just add this, get near water, especially at a lunar eclipse. You want to go to the ocean, the lake, the
Mm.
river, put your feet in the water. If you can't do that, take an Epsom salt bath. Sprinkle yourself with holy water. Sprinkle the environment around you with holy water. So you're cleansing and purifying with the water.
Mm.
And as the moon is eclipsed, you want to remember her holy waters and how grateful we are for her waters. And we are 70 to 80% water. So it's really a big thank you to Mother
Mm.
Moon and our Mother Waters.
Yeah, I love that. And bathing after eclipses is highly recommended, and I've really felt the benefits of that. It's kind of like that renewal, as you said, especially with the was it the solar eclipse? Is that the one that happens on Amavasya? Is that right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that real renewal, and it's like, okay, that's done. That kind of shaking up, formation aspect has happened, and I'm going to bathe and start fresh, and it really like helps cleanse that energy of stirring up all that was stirred up. And if you look in the
Hmm.
mythology, it's kind of like Rahu and Ketu kind of getting revenge on the sun and moon for stealing, cutting their throat, and not allowing them to get all the nectar. So uh, I'm going to block you for a bit. But yeah, thanks so much for that, and thanks again for sharing those mantras. And yeah, well, I think that's great. I appreciate your mentioning of how be careful with fasting. Fasting is very specific; it should be done according to individuals, and I always recommend working with a practitioner with fasting.
Yeah.
But yes, definitely shake up your usual eating routine and make it lighter. And yeah, of course, the word for fasting in Sanskrit is, or one of the words is upavasha, which means closer to God. And when you're less of that heaviness, you have that greater purity in your physical body, so that you can allow the mind and the spirit, which is governed by these eclipses, to be more. open and
And
receptive.
when there is a solar eclipse, if the sun is a reflection of our Agni, if that's Agni in the sky, does reflect the Agni of our Jatara Agni, our digestion, which Ayurveda teaches, then during a solar eclipse, right, there is less Agni.
Mm,
So being aware of that, that the digestive fire is likely to be weaker in those times anyway.
mm,
So another reason to fast. Yeah.
love that. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Laura. That was great.
Yeah.
That's all. Anything else that you want to mention, or?
Just to remember the light of you, right? And I think that's the one thing that I love Ayurveda and I love Jyotish because it weaves us back into the rhythms of nature. It helps us understand the energies that are around us so that we can harness and harmonize them. And
Mm,
yet, it always also reminds us that even as those things are dynamically changing and flowing around us, there is something eternal and stable within, right? So we're not jetsam and flotsam in the waves of the water, right? We're a particle and a wave itself. We are light, right? And so grounding into that, have full faith in you, celebrate your uniqueness, right? But also really know the truth of who you are because the world needs people to wake up to that. We need more light in this world. We need people. And it's not like wait till you're 50 or wait till you've done all the courses that Dylan has to offer, which are all beautiful. But know it now. You're already that. And Dylan is reflecting that light back to you, right? The moon is reflecting that light back to you. Jyotish is really just reflecting back to us who we are. There's sun in the heart, moon in the mind, and all the planets within traveling around.
mm.
So anchor into the light within.
Oh, beautiful. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah. Thank you, Dylan. It's always
Great.
good to be with you.
Thank you. That was beautiful.